humans are not trained to deal with facts and figures beyond, maybe two or three. And when you're talking a competitive, cycle, a sales cycle where there's 5 vendors and they're all doing a demo, at the end of the day, honestly, a lot of times it comes down to who do they like best and who do they remember the most. And that's usually not based on logic, right?
Hey, Zach, thanks for joining me for this episode of Coffee with Closers.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So someone who may not have met you before, can you share with our audience a little bit about who you are and your current role with the company that you work for and your journey as a marketer?
Sure. Yeah. So I am a kind of a blended role. So I'm a product marketer. I sit within the product marketing org of our overall kind of marketing org. But externally, I'm a CDP evangelist, which ultimately means I get to talk about the category that we're in. What does it mean? It's new, it's a new technology for a lot of marketers. The first time that they've potentially bought it. So how to use it? What does it mean? Why should you care? Kind of thing. And so spend a lot of time doing events like this, podcasts, going out speaking at conferences. I love working trade shows. Getting to have thousands of conversations, but I've been in the MarTech space for almost 15 years now in a variety of roles, and so this is just another iteration of that kind of career progression.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot more companies are actually doing an evangelist role. I don't know who may have first to do it. I think it had to be Google, because I remember Google had a evangelist in their role, like going around teaching people about AdWords and how to use Google Ads to generate business and things like that. But now almost all the SaaS companies have like an evangelist role.
It's really kind of evolved. I think originally a lot of them were especially on the developer side, right, working with a developer community or who's a little bit more resistant to advertising and marketing, and so they have more communication. But I think a lot of the marketing orgs have figured out that there's so many opportunities for content and different ways to be out there, and that was actually something I pushed for when I joined Treasure Data. Was I said, look, it's great. I can create narrative, I can create story, but somebody's got to go out and tell it, right? Somebody's got to go out and share that message, and that's exactly where where I want to land. So that's how I kind of forced them. I forced their hand a little bit and said, hey, look, this is the way I want to. I think we should do it, and so it's been great. It works real well for us, and we can obviously talk more about how we got there. But yeah, I think it's a growing. It's definitely a growing side of marketing.
Yeah, I mean, evangelism and education is definitely the way to get the market, especially if you're in like you said, right? You're creating a category for the first time, which means you definitely need to be educating the market. Maybe the demand isn't already there. CDP, I think it's getting some traction. A lot more people are talking about it, but most people thought, okay, Salesforce came and said, be the single source of truth. That's what everybody thought. That's where you would have your customer data, your sales data, your all the renewals data, all of that stuff is probably there. But now there's more than ever, right? There's thousands, if not millions, of touch points across multiple platforms, multiple technology, marketing, sales, customer success. I mean, it's getting really crazy for businesses to really actually keep a tab on who the customers are and all the touch points that they have with the brand.
Yeah, that's exactly the challenge, right? Even in the last 2 or 3 years, right? When we went into the pandemic and all of a sudden people's digital transformation pipelines went from, oh, we're going to do this over the next 2 or 3 years to we're doing this over 3 or 4 months, and new channels, new technologies, new delivery mechanisms, right? Groceries delivered to your door, and people who were never shopping online are now pros at shopping online and having things delivered. So it really changed, I think, how consumers interacted with brands, how brands thought about interaction, and it just exploded the digitization of all of these touch points. And so I mean, CRM is a huge component in many organizations, but unfortunately they're not built to handle that kind of scale and volume of data and types of data, right? Different channels, different attributes, calculated metrics, clickstream data. It's just it's a very different type of data.
And then we as customers are expecting a level of experience that's seamless across multiple touch points as well. Like, I hate having to refill the same form on the same website that I've been to before, or like I expect them to just have one click checkout. right? Like, why do I have to just always have to remember everything, right? And some of the companies are using completely different type of checkout. I think even Facebook recently have a new way of signing in, which is like a code. I don't know if you've noticed that. Like when you log into Facebook, they prompted you with an option to log in with a code, which that's kind of new to me. I've always used using the username and password.
Right. Well, and I think it's more secure, theoretically more secure way. It's the challenge method, right? It's kind of forcing people to do two-factor authentication when they didn't even know
Uh-huh.
what that what that might have been.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think, yeah, we set a bar as a consumer. We set a bar based on those good experiences, right? So whether it's Amazon, whether it's the recommendation engine of Netflix, I mean, we use those as kind of cliche examples in marketing anymore. But the reality is that's what consumers of any type set their level at. And then now when you go to any other brand, you, even in the back of your mind, even if you're not, consciously thinking of it, you're kind of keeping score. This is good experience, this is bad. And eventually, if you're too much in the negative on the bad, or it's too much friction, or it's just too hard, you abandon, you move on, you quit spending. And it doesn't have to be anything major. It's just enough of the little things, the little annoyances anymore, because there's so much opportunity for competition, so much opportunity for replacement, and
Mm-hmm.
and typically as consumers, we rethought like our brand and our buying behavior at like major life points, right? So our family we're in the process of moving and relocating, right? So people rethink, oh, how do you buy? Where do you buy? What doctor? Whatever. Or you go off to college, or you have a kid, or even minor moments like back to school. Well, the whole world went through one of those up and during the pandemic, we all kind of rethought our strategy. We thought about who we spent money with and how we view the world through the brands that we are affiliated with. And so we're all kind of coming out of this now, and we say going back to normal, but I don't think normal exists anymore. It's going back
Mm-hmm.
to a variation of that, where you're like, hey, I'm willing to deal with a brand, but I've also found out that I can just as easily find an alternative. And so it's an interesting time for marketers, because the idea of just showing up is definitely not a viable strategy anymore.
Most certainly. So obviously, I saw on your LinkedIn you kind of position yourself as a storyteller. So, and we hear a lot about, it's a commonly talked about concept everywhere you turn. People are talking about storytelling. Can you define to our audience how you define storytelling?
Yeah, to me, storytelling is about going beyond facts and logic and looking at emotion and connection and impact,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the idea is, B2B can be very boring. I work in the B2B world, right? Even though my customers work with B2C. In the B2B world, it's like, it's features and benefits and facts. And the problem is we don't remember that stuff, right? Humans are not trained to deal with facts and figures beyond, maybe two or three. And when you're talking a competitive, a sales cycle where there's 5 vendors and they're all doing a demo, at the end of the day, honestly, a lot of times it comes down to who do they like best and who do they remember the most.
Mm-hmm.
And that's usually not based on logic, right? We tend to buy things emotionally and then rationalize them logically after the fact. So,
Mm-hmm.
emotion is really just about storytelling is really just about connecting to that emotion and giving that idea of, you know, connecting with your customers meaningfully,
Mm-hmm.
just giving it a name. Storytelling, narrative, whatever that is. Um, to me, that's what it comes down to.
Mm-hmm. And how do you practically incorporate storytelling in marketing? I mean, obviously, there's so many things that are happening. You're creating blogs, you might have webinars, you have, like you said, you might be going to trade show to exhibit. Like, how do you practically incorporate storytelling into the overall marketing strategy?
Yeah, so I think there's tactical ways, and then there's kind of strategic thought. So one is obviously just being out there doing events like this, a podcast, or standing at a trade show. To me, I can stand at a trade show and I can do a demo, or I can roll a PowerPoint with some messaging on there. But the thing is where I make a connection. So when somebody walks up and I say, well, what do you do? Tell me what are you struggling with? Oh, well, let me give you an example of a customer who's felt that same way. And I tell a story about what they did, where they were at, the pain that they felt, and ultimately how they came out the other side.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what people walk away and they go, oh yeah. And then they remember that. Right. And so to me, the tactical element is just, it's transparency and authenticity, right? Being able to go out and say, rather than, give you a bunch of facts and figures or give you a white paper, they have their place, right? That goes into that logical side when we want to kind of go back and kind of rationalize everything. But that initial connection, that breaking through and creating some attention, is all about just, having a conversation, telling it in a format that people are willing to remember and hopefully not be boring along the way.
Yeah, and I'm starting to see, I don't know if you've noticed it, like even on Instagram, YouTube ads, I'm seeing a lot more video testimonial as ads targeting me. And these are B2B companies, at tons of it, which is just like a testimonial, like sometimes like a collage of testimonials into a video, and then they're targeting me and showing me that. Is that a good use of storytelling to get attention from prospective buyers, get them to inquire about that product offering?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why influencer marketing became a thing, right? Is
Hmm.
because the idea of connecting with a brand sometimes is hard for consumers, right? And there's that logic barrier where it's like, well, I might want it, I want. But when you're connecting with a person and they're telling you like, oh, this is how I use it, or like this is my daily routine, or whatever, yeah, and influencer marketing kind of became a whole other thing. But the value was they were telling stories, and for B2B is just a little late to the game in the same, but it's the same logic, right? If you know that your peers are using a certain product or doing a certain tactic, you're going to feel more comfortable in trying it out, testing it out, being open to it, right? Because you've taken some of that fear away. And fear is a very big emotion. It's very easy to stay doing nothing or
Hmm.
stay in the rut that
Status
you
quo.
might be in because
Hmm.
you're afraid of failure, you're afraid of a poor outcome, you're afraid of just not knowing, do we have the capacity to, whatever it is, right? So
Hmm.
if you're afraid, you're gonna be locked in. Well, if I can tell you a story of 10 other people who've done it, or I can show you those 10 people and they're telling the story even more powerful, it's a great way to open up that conversation.
Yeah, the cost of inaction, like I think we underestimate the power of cost of inaction in sales conversation and in marketing, because we only tell the stories of the guys that actually took the action and got the results, but we never really go get the stories of the people who delayed the decision and then suffered the consequences. I mean, have you seen any companies doing that really well though, telling the stories of the cost of inaction?
Yeah, in fact, actually, when so I came from part of my career path. I was in marketing, and then I went into kind of a pre-sales role where I would do product demos and presentations. And one of the things I learned along the way, one of the things I teach now, and work with our pre-sales org, is around saying, okay, look, here's a pain point, great, but we need to raise the stakes a little bit and talk about, well, what's the crisis of inaction, right? What happens when you don't, and how does that feel, and what's the outcome, and what are your competitors doing or not doing? Because that's just as important as talking about like, oh, here's the happy rose colored glasses, perfect world that will come out the other side if you use our product. But yeah, focusing on what might not, either the opportunity gains that you lose, or the pain that you're going to continue to feel, I think is an important piece to call out. And
Hmm.
in fact, it's interesting when I work trade shows, one of the things I do is I kind of talk about like, why haven't you done it already, or why
Hmm.
aren't you there? And a lot of people can really articulate the pain that they're already feeling, and then you say,
Hmm.
okay, but if I offered you a solution, would you be willing to get rid of that pain? And they all go, well, I mean, I guess we'd have to, like, they're, even though they can articulate the pain that they're feeling, they're still sometimes willing to sit in it. And so being able to keep that front and center and be like, look, do you want to be in this bucket or do you want to be in that bucket, and be able to guide people down that path is a huge part of selling, especially in the B2B space.
Yeah, I can't remember the author of the book. It's called Three Value Conversation. I don't know if you read that book. I think it kind of talks about the whole setting up the buying criteria. Like the salespeople should control the buying criteria, set it up for the buyer, and make them understand, right, like what they should be looking for in a solution, even things that they haven't thought about in when they're considering an option or a solution.
Yeah, I mean, I think, from a criteria perspective, right? It's too easy to approach B2B, especially formulaic, right? Like, okay, well, I'm going to go and they're going to buy on these 5 criteria. And that's true, but generally you don't get to those criteria until you've created that emotional connection or you've created that rapport, because ultimately we're human, we're people. Like, we don't just shut off when we walk into work and, and whatnot. And so I think there's a lot that B2B companies can learn from the B2C companies, and how they market, and how they go to market, how they message, how they create that emotional appeal and that connection, when they're talking to, when they're going through their sales cycles. There's a lot you can steal. And
Mm-hmm.
I just don't, I mean, a lot of companies haven't even scratched the surface of that.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about treasured data. So tell us a little bit about what treasured data, what it is, and what your company offers.
Yeah. So Treasure Data, we are a customer data platform company.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, our vision is to help, companies create connected customer experiences. What does that
Mm-hmm.
mean? Well, it means just all the stuff we've been talking about. The idea is all of these profiles and all of these interactions with brands exist, and unfortunately, too often they live in silos, right? So you may have part of your profile in the email system. There's some other data living over in the loyalty platform. There's some stuff in your transactional systems, and if you walk in and they only address that fragment of you, right, you have that disconnected experience. You have that feeling of, well, now I have to tell my story all again. I'm going to call the call center and they're not going to know who I am and won't even know that I just made a purchase online, right? So
Mm-hmm.
so all breaking down those silos and looking at the creating the true 360-degree view of the customer, that's a foundational piece, right? You bring all of that data together. But
Mm-hmm.
more importantly then is being able to activate on that, right? So second part of our platform is really then helping marketers have access to the data to build audiences, build segmentations, build data, manage journeys, giving access to customer support teams so that they have the same view, so that they know what's going on. What content has this person viewed on our website? What emails have they looked at? All of that information is valuable and allows your entire kind of workforce to be more empowered to put the customers back at the center of the conversation. So, we're a tech company, working in data, but really it's about, creating those customer
Mm-hmm.
experiences.
And when you talk about this sort of a customer data platform, right? So I know you said your typical customers are B2C because they have much more larger volume of end users that are interacting with their brands across so many different venues. But in terms of the use case, it's not just only for B2C. I'm assuming it's also a B2B, right?
No, absolutely. And we do have B2B customers. I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to, the go-to-market strategy and, the data. So we work with some very large, companies that have both B2B sides, B2C sides. We work with a lot of CPG, who've kind of figured out that, hey, even though we don't control the transactional relationship, the brand affinity and the brand connection is super important to us because, you know, because there's competition out there, because people may not walk into a store anymore and having an end cap or having a merchandising display doesn't work the same way it used to, especially when somebody's buying online, right? So being able to manage those relationships and controlling the data are super important. So across the gamut, if people are trying to create a connection with an individual, with a contact, that is kind of the core value prop for CDP, regardless of industry, regardless of vertical, regardless of B2B or B2C.
Yeah, and I know now with this push of privacy, which is becoming a big hot topic, any conference that you go to. I just came back from Inbound, and then there was a whole conversation around, hey, why we need to have the first party data and not necessarily relying on third party solutions. Where I think this is where a technology like yours become important because you want to be collecting the data firsthand. You need to be building your own audience and not rely on what might be available through an ad platform or whatnot, right? So that's where I feel like this sort of investment is almost a requirement if you are trying to have more access to your own customer data.
Yeah, I mean, it started with the idea, years ago. It's like, oh, build your email list, right? We've heard marketers talk about, oh, build your email list. Don't just rely on the walled gardens, but just take that across all of the channels. That reality exists, and so being able to control and prepare, there's a competitive advantage and or disadvantage if you have or don't have that data, right? So thinking through all of your data touch points and saying, am I in control of this data, or am I dependent on a third party channel, is a huge thing. And then
Mm-hmm.
from a brand protection perspective, right, being able to say, not only am I controlling this, I know where it's coming from, I know where we sourced it, I know who's using it, I'm working with my agencies. I'm limiting access to certain information to that agency, so that data is not lost or accidentally emailed to the wrong person. All of those things, all of the governance and whatnot, also is super important, because we don't want to be beholden to third parties, but we also want to make sure that when we are collecting the data, we're securing it and we're keeping that level of transparency and trust from a from a relationship with the customer perspective, right? And then layer on legislation requirements and CCPA, GDPR, federal U.S. government requirements are forthcoming, I think, and every state every state has some sort of legislation either in play right now or coming right in committee and whatnot.
And do you think, obviously, the privacy, we all as marketers, we want as much information about our customers, but we also care a lot about our own privacy. But where do you think is the future of this privacy conversation is headed, especially as sales and marketers? I mean, as this privacy become more and more of a hot topic, where do you think this is headed?
Yeah. So I think consumers have woken up and figured out that their data is valuable, right? And so they're willing, and I mean, even research and surveys and everything kind of still shows and indicates that consumers are willing to give up data for the right reasons, right? If there's a value exchange that goes on, so I'll give you this information because I'm getting more personalized interaction. Okay, that works. Or I'm buying something online, I'll give you my shipping address because when I get it back, you're going to send me something, right? But I don't necessarily need to give you my income range and how many people are in my household and like all this other data that marketer may want that, but they don't need it for that interaction. And so I think what's going to happen is, you're going to see a lot more of the first party data being collected, or surveys and opportunities for consumers to interact and give information. But marketers are going to have to be more creative in all this information, but saying like, am I actually using, like if I collect it, am I using it? Right. I know there's so many people who will say, well, we have to collect this so we can segment this audience, so we can build this. And then I'm like, okay, but let's map this out. Are you running any campaigns with that data point? Well, not currently, but we may in the future. Okay, well then let's not collect it because it's a huge friction point, or it's a customers are a little leery of why you need that information. And so there's going to have to be a balancing act between what you need to do, personalization, or what you need to do targeting, and versus what you may want in the future. So
yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I probably have so many, because of all the connected devices that I have, right? With Nest for the thermostats and Google Apps running on my phone, and Google Maps always tracking my location, and Nest is promising me to control my air conditioning and heating at home when I leave the house. I don't have to think about it. It will set it up to what most optimal way to do it. But you give up so much of your privacy for convenience without really even thinking what the heck is
right.
These companies are doing. And I think I've heard someone saying, right, if the product is free, then you are the product, or something like that, right?
Yeah, and the funny thing is you're willing to do it, right? Because I do the same thing. I have the Nest thermostats too, right? And I don't mind. Like, okay, fine. Google knows when I come home and when I leave.
Exactly.
Big deal to me. I don't care. The thing is, there are people who do care, and I think that's actually a great opportunity for brands to build. One of the suggestions I always give is build a center of excellence, build a data governance team, not just the process and the technology and all that, but get a collection of people in a room and say, okay, here's the data we're collecting, but make that team up of people who are maybe like you and I, right? I don't care. They can have my data because I want but then get the divisive opinion, right? Get the person who's like, I don't want Google to have anything about me. And then let that, because then you have both sides and you can kind of argue and you can say, okay, this data point's super important because it triggers everything else, right? So can we geofence it to say, well, I don't know where you're going. I just know that you've left here. Okay, well, that's enough. And so then we, what I mean? There's different ways to architect the problem or the solution to the problem. And I think having those voices are going to be super important, because marketers may be a little bit more open to giving out data than, and then there's other people in your org who are going to be like, no, not at all. I don't want to share that information. And you shouldn't shy away from those voices.
I use Strava as an app that I use for like biking, and if I leave from home, it actually knows my home, and it doesn't show where I started my journey and where I ended my journey. It just shows my journey.
Yeah.
Like, and then I think it's like in the first, I don't know, like the first 7 minutes of my bike ride is kind of hidden. So from my connected, my whoever I'm connected to in the Strava app, they can see where I started my journey.
Right.
So
Right.
which
They
is,
can
I
see where
think,
you rode, but they don't have a map to your house.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, which is kind of their way of, providing me the ability to see my journey. I can see where I went and, gone and all that, but whoever is actually following me, they cannot see where I started my journey. Especially I start from my home, because that's part of their commitment to me as a user to, protect my privacy. And I think that going back to what we said, right? I think that if there's a utility for why you have that data that you're collecting, and if you're going to make my life a lot better by having my information, I think most people are willing to give that.
I was gonna say, well, you can just ask. I mean, I
Yeah.
think, because digital has allowed us to capture so much information kind of behind the scenes, where we've
Mm-hmm.
gotten away in a lot of scenarios from just asking the customer, like, do you want option A or option B? Are you here for whatever? Right. And so self-segmenting and self, identification is actually something a lot of customers are willing to do. And we try to create all these automated implied personalization and things, but sometimes it's just saying, hey, do you want me to hide your home? Yeah, I do. Or no, I don't care, whatever. So I mean, being able to ask those questions opens up transparency, and I think there are some cool brands that are starting to kind of go down that path and just say, like, why are you here? What's your goal? And let me help you get to that goal. And people are responsive to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think Amazon has got to be the best of the breed when it comes to using your single source of access for everything. Like I think you can shop with at a Whole Foods. You can, I don't know if you are if you have Amazon Fresh anywhere near you, but you can walk in with your app, Amazon app, and get in, purchase, walk out, and you don't
Yep.
even have to talk to anybody. But other than Amazon, anybody who's really doing a great job of a unified experience for their customers that you've seen in the recent days.
Well, I mean, I think everybody does it slightly differently. I mean, obviously, I think Apple, from an entire ecosystem, has really, upped their game, because now they've built it so obviously your family can have profiles. You can create profiles for your kids, and so I mean, I think there's that from a technical perspective. Even Uber has some great interactions now with Uber Eats. I was traveling, a week or so ago, and you're in the car and you're like, I'm going. They know where I'm going. I'm going from an airport to a hotel, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's very obvious because I put that information in. And so, right in the app, when I'm kind of seeing how far away I am, it's like, hey, do you want food delivered to your hotel? Well, 6 o'clock at night. That's a very logical personalization for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they know that information. The funny thing is, the next 2 or 3 days later, when I was leaving in the morning, it was 6 a.m. I was going from a hotel to the airport. They didn't personalize that. There was
Because
no, like, hey, do you want food delivered to the airport? Well, no,
they know
because
you're in a
that's,
hurry to get out.
so just using that some basic, like, it seems obvious, but at the same time, there's so many people who are just like, oh, it's morning. Let's advertise breakfast. Well, no, like, let's have some contextual clues to what's going on as well.
So obviously at Treasure Data, you have this evangelist role. You guys are doing a lot in terms of events, obviously trade shows and exhibits and things like that. What are some strategies, especially on the demand gen side, have worked really well for you guys?
Yeah, so we test out and try a lot of things. Obviously, we've invested a lot lately in content,
Mm-hmm.
in a variety of ways. So, obviously the traditional, blog posts and all that stuff, but we have a third party category website. So we own CDP.com as well. So we purchased that a couple years ago, and we've kind of built that up as a agnostic kind of brand category site, and we have a podcast run through cdp.com. It's a third party CIO that that we have a relationship with, who hosts that, just to kind of get the take on the martech industry. So I think that's been an interesting tactic, and it has done a lot for elevating the entire category. Beyond that, I think the other big thing, like, I just did a LinkedIn live a couple weeks ago,
Mm-hmm.
and we said, hey, look, coming out of one of our QBRs with our sales team, they said, hey, we'd love some of this content on, implementing when your resources are lean, right? And we're just like, well, why don't we just go out there and put this content out there. 0-click, no gated, out there. You don't have to like sign up for a webinar and kind of, open. So we've definitely started kind of evaluating the idea of, 0-click content, not putting it behind a gate, opening it up. And it was it was a 30-minute, 40-minute LinkedIn live that I hosted and went through some content and had internet drop out in the middle, or whatever. Nobody cared. And at the end of the day, we actually generated pipeline from it. We generated some opportunities. So I think it's just one of the big things, and one of the big strategies that we have right now is experimentation. I'm doing a lot of video. I've got a video series coming up here that I'm hosting on just questions people ask. And so we're testing a lot of things. We're iterating very quickly. I think one of the best opportunities that B2B has, but even B2C has right now, is that people have so much opportunity, but yet we're still starved for content, right? If you like something, you're willing to binge it. And so my new kind of strategy my new thought is really like, how do you be the Netflix? And I'm never going to be Netflix, but how do you be the Netflix so that when somebody watches something, there's something else to follow it up? So if they're going to come read our content, I want them to have 3 or 4 or 5 other things behind it, right? Whether that's videos, maybe they want to read a blog post or whatever, they should be able to binge our content. And I think that works for B2C. I think that works for B2B. Are we there yet? Not at all. Like there's so much more opportunity. There's never enough time in the day. But it doesn't have to be these long corporate polished videos. Like we're starting to do a lot of the more natural, quick hit, talking head. I'm holding up my phone kind of thing, doing video. We do it at events and whatnot. So that's really an area that I think is opening up a lot of opportunity for us.
Yeah, I think marketers need to start kind of acknowledging that the reality that you just described, because they all want extremely polished, super perfectionist, type of videos, but those are hard to come by, extremely expensive to produce, and if the value that comes out of it, if you don't get enough out of it, then you just wasted all that time and energy on it.
Yeah, and it takes forever, right? It takes so long.
Yeah.
Whereas I can sit down and record a 2-minute video on my, on my phone and, edit it on my phone and have it ready and post it, right? In a day. So the technology has really allowed us to kind of change the game. And it's uncomfortable for some people, but, I don't have all the answers, but I'm sure second to try. I'm going to go out there and play around until we figure it out.
So one big question I have about this content, right? Everybody understands the importance of content marketing, but oftentimes people give up too soon. Like you guys are playing the long game. You went and bought a domain, and you're trying to create content. You actually built a relationship, someone who's kind of not part of the company, but you're paying them to be the spokesperson or subject matter expert. And companies are doing this multiple different ways. I don't know if you've heard of how Outreach, they went and bought Sales Hacker because they didn't start blogging until very, very late. So they thought, hey, we got to catch up. So they found a publication. They bought the publication that had the audience. Whereas Sales Loft, they actually did blogging and created a ton of content very early on. So they were leading with content first, and then they had an outbound strategy. So you see kind of the two sides of the play. And you saw maybe a year or two ago how HubSpot went and bought the publication. I think it was called Hustler. Right? They went and bought that. So there's a whole push toward kind of leading with content, creating a community, and then using that community to kind of get your word out or your brand out, right? Like you're seeing that to be a strategy. But the biggest thing is if you're not playing the long game, you're going to give up very, very quickly, because content game is not an easy game, right? You got to create podcasts, videos, and they ultimately, if the distribution isn't there and the reach isn't there, that's where the problem. So what are some tactics that you've seen really work for you guys in terms of getting the distribution without really spending a top dollars on, LinkedIn ads or YouTube ads?
Yeah. I think first off is if you're doing LinkedIn ads or YouTube ads or all these other things, don't stop, right? You can't just be like, oh, I'm going to create some content tomorrow and therefore I don't have to spend anymore. No, it's not going to replace it, or it's the long game. But I think the other thing is setting expectations internally, right? When we, when I said, hey, let's do this LinkedIn live, we're going to try it out, and we're going to do a bunch more. But the questions were like, okay, well, how do we see who registered? I'm like, we don't. Like, people can say that they're attending, but that doesn't mean anything. Okay, well, how do we know? I'm like, this is not a webinar. We need to think this is as like a living, breathing blog post. And when we presented it like that, they're like, oh, okay, so it's content. It's, I said, yeah. this is probably not going to drive a lot of pipeline. Like, this is not what it's for. It's really probably for people who are already in our pipeline or who already are talking to us. And it's just more content that they remember us. They trust us. They believe in, what we're saying is true. They don't have to just, kind of take the salesperson's word for it. So I think that was kind of eye opening. And I think that's the reality of all kind of content marketing right now. And thankfully, content marketing is not new. I think we just have so many other ways of doing it, but you have to set expectations right. You cannot say, hey, I'm going to go out and do a video from inbound and therefore I'll have, 10x in my pipeline tomorrow. Like that reality doesn't work. And I think when you pair that with research and data and that shows that, especially on the B2B side, people are they're buying in the same amount of time, but they're spending a whole lot less time in a sales cycle, right? Because they're doing all of their research before they even engage with the sales team. So they're 50, 60, 70, 80%, of the way through their decision-making process before they interact with your brand. And so the more content you have out there and the more you're influencing that, and you don't even realize it, hopefully, ideally, in the perfect world. So yeah, you absolutely have to play the long game. You're not going to have a viral hit overnight, and it's going to solve all your revenue. So you have to have an approach that allows you to play that long game, but also continue to do the standard demand gen. We're still going to do the partner driven webinars. We still do paid advertising. We still do trade shows. I'm just trying to figure out, how do I amplify around that? Can I do some messaging while I'm at the trade show to get, because trade shows are great, but they have a very limited shelf life, right? You're there for a week and then you have an audience of X amount of people and that's it. Like, there's no follow on. But if I can create some content that comes out of that for everybody who didn't attend, or I can give some insights, or I can do some videos while I'm there and help drive, our brand awareness for the people who attended because they saw my videos, whatever that may be. Those are the things that just have, force multipliers that improve all the other spend you are already doing. So I look at it in kind of three buckets. One is creating new thought leadership, creating, opening people up to the problem and solution. That's kind of the front end, right? A lot of that is blog. But the middle one that I think is the newer one, which is really around creating that vision and that view for the future, giving people I know this problem, I'm doing my research, I don't want to read blog posts, I want the real thing, but I'm not ready to talk to people. And I think that is a huge opportunity. So like I said, Q&A on, hey, here's problems people face, or the LinkedIn Live. Those are perfect for people who I've identified a problem. I generally understand that this is the solution. But I just don't want to talk to sales yet. I just don't want to be hounded. I don't want to demo yet. And that's okay. So let me give you some content to help you until you're ready, because when you are ready, you're going to call me first.
Yeah. So how do you get leadership to understand this approach that you've mentioned, right? Because this whole concept of, ungating everything and making things much more accessible to your end customers, which is what I think Drift has been trying to teach, right? Like the conversational marketing, and they want to completely eliminate forms on every website because that's what their goal is, right? Either they're in the market, they want to schedule a demo and buy it, or they're just browsing and learning. Why the heck you want their form fills if they're not actually looking to make a purchase? Which I can understand the logic behind that. But how do you get marketer, some of the older CMOs and maybe some of the older leadership who still want the MQLs and the SQL counts from every marketing campaigns? And if you don't have that to show for, then you just wasted all that time and money.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as a marketer, you still have to be a performance marketer, even with your content. Like when I'm creating content, I'm not just like, hey, I'm artistic. I'm a sales minded person. So I'm creating content with calls to action. I'm creating emotional hooks that draw in my ideal customer profile. Like, I'm approaching it like a copywriter doing performance marketing. I'm just presenting that message in a slightly different way. So I think you still have to approach it like pipeline. You still need MQLs, you still need leads, you still need all of that stuff. But I think the other side of it is test. test is a big thing, right? You don't have to go out and have, you don't have to go out and buy Sales Hacker and jump right in. Like if you're not bought into like, can we do this? But go create a small video series, try it out. It's pretty low hanging fruit, effort wise. And you can see, does my audience engage with it? Did I get some feedback? Yeah. Okay, cool. Now let's expand that. Let's add on to it. Right. So you can do kind of the bite size, low hanging fruit, do something simple and easy. Do a video with a current customer and then, and post it and see what kind of engagement you get, and empower your team members in your organization who are already doing content. Like even if Treasure Data didn't want to, I'd probably do content anyway. Like I'm going to do it anyway. And there's others in my, in Treasure Data team who are the same way. Right. So empower them, give them tools, help them out. Because those are all easy ways you can get started, and you're going to see some momentum and you're going to start to build that flywheel. So then the leadership team's like, great, now let's pour some gas on this fire, and let's invest and let's put some, more energy behind all of this.
Yeah. I mean, I think at the end of the day, like you said, right, it's really solving for the customer, providing the best engagement for them, right? So if they're already interacting with your content and they're coming to your website, doing all those things, you might already have some of their information. Why do you always need to even ask for their form fills? And make it easy for them to consume. And then when they are ready, like you said, sometimes 70, 80% of the journey, they're already completed. And if they're convinced that they need a solution, they are going to reach out because you were the one to educate them early on and give them the ideas and solutions.
Yeah, you only need one champion at a customer or prospect to tell your sales team, oh yeah, that I saw this and it really helped, to get that momentum and that excitement. Because all the sales is like, hey, can we do more of that? Like, because if it works, like they're all bought in. So there's it doesn't take, you don't need thousands of proof points. Like you get a couple early on, and leadership is willing to, typically I see leadership willing to try, because we're all out there. It's a very competitive space in general, like not even CDP, but just, marketing, customer acquisition. So yeah, you got to just try new things.
The MarTech ecosystem is like 15,000 tools right now. It's just crazy to even imagine.
It's crazy. I mean, who would have thought Scott Brinker would have, when he started that map, it's like there's never enough paper to fill it all out.
G2 will never go out of business for sure. This speed, right? So we can obviously sit here and talk forever, Zach, about marketing strategies and things like that. But I kind of have a wrapping question for you. If you had $1 million today to go do something for marketing, how would you invest that money?
Yeah, $1 million is a lot. Honestly, I think I would. This is not probably going to be any surprise based on the fact that I've been talking about storytelling this entire time and where my energy is. But honestly, I think I would do 3 things. One is I would build a content studio within an org, right? So video production, TV, blog posts, all this stuff, because if you have all those tools, there's so much content that a team can generate. But more importantly, I would build it so it's portable. And I would build it so I could put it on, let's call it a tour bus, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to tour the country, and I'm going to go to conferences, I'm going to go to events, I'm going to go to trade shows, not my own. I'm going to go to other people's, and I'm going to create conversations and create stories where my prospects are. And I'm going to offer value that may not have anything to do with me. Because I think that is a huge opportunity. If my target market is marketers, right? So going out and talking to them about how do they do their job better? Yeah, maybe part of that is customer data platform, but really, just going out and doing blog posts and conversations and thought leadership and all of those things, and just travel the country and go around and take a team, and spend 6 months and do a massive rolling road show. That's probably what I would do.
Yeah, I think every business needs to be a publication today. They need to be in the media business. I think the companies that are accepting that reality and really jumping into it really are seeing the success of it, which is, I think, is a great way to invest your money if you had the money to do it. Well, Zach, I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much for sparing your time and your wisdom with our audience. Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun. Appreciate it.
This episode of Coffee with Closers is brought to you by OneIMS, a leading digital marketing agency helping businesses win new customers. To request a free marketing ROI audit, please visit oneims.com. If you enjoyed this video, please share it to make sure you never miss an episode. Please subscribe.